There was a famous man known throughout the world. His name was widely recognized. He was someone uncontrollable, a once renowned swordmaster now confined to his room. He was also known as a man out of his mind, Count Perdium's useless oldest son, Ghislain Perdium. Then, there was a person who couldn't believe he had been defeated by the man in the rumors. He couldn't comprehend that he, the best knight of the North, had just been beaten like that. He wanted to ask why he had been defeated by such a garbage human being. A robed figure then addressed the knight, saying he must be feeling pretty warm and cozy right now. The robed man told the knight he had invested a lot of money into setting that trap. The knight, clad in armor and a robe, approached him, carrying a large battle axe. The robed man asked the knight if he liked what he had prepared. That man in armor was, in fact, Ghislain Perdium. The knight, shocked, said that he must be the trash Ghislain. He asked what kind of trap it was and whether Ghislain was telling him that he had known of his plans all along. Ghislain replied that it wasn't just that he knew that simple plan of the knight and his allies. He said he also knew how many were in the knight's army, who the spies were, and who had helped the knight with reinforcements. Ghislain told the knight that he had known everything from the start. The knight felt as though he had been in Ghislain's palm from the very beginning. In disbelief, the knight shouted, claiming there was no way Ghislain could have done that, as he had always been a hidden ace. He demanded to know how someone like Ghislain, who was known as trash, could dare to do such a thing. But before the knight could continue spouting nonsense, Ghislain kicked him in the face, knocking him unconscious, and told him to shut his mouth. Ghislain then threw away his helmet. He declared that they could try invading his territory as many times as they wanted, but he assured that he would be the one to win the war next time, and every time after that. He asked the unconscious knight if he knew why Ghislain was so certain of victory. Ghislain said it was because he had all their plans in his mind. A year ago, in the Luthania kingdom near the Perdium estate, Ghislain awoke, panting heavily, shaking, and staring at his body. He started questioning what had just happened, clutching his neck, sweating, and pale. He wondered if he was still alive. He couldn't believe it because something had just happened to him. A sword had flown into the air after being parried by another warrior, falling to the ground. Two strong warriors had been fighting, and one seemed to have already lost. It was Ghislain, swearing, on the verge of defeat. But it didn't end there, as he took another slash to his body. Ghislain's enemy smiled at him. He told Ghislain that this must be how it ends, that Ghislain Perdium, once known as the Mercenary King and one of the continent's strongest men, had lost. He said the war was already over. This man was Idun, one of the continent's top 7 men, like Ghislain, known as the Noble Knight. Idun pointed his sword at Ghislain and asked if he had any last words before being killed. Ghislain said there were none, but he told Idun it was a shame he couldn't fulfill his revenge. With a glare, his face wounded and beaten, Ghislain told Idun to die, calling him a sickening bastard. Idun smirked, telling Ghislain he had been too arrogant. While pointing his sword at him, Idun mentioned that he hadn't expected Ghislain to be the oldest son of the fallen Perdium household. He then asked Ghislain if he had left his family after his sister died. This caught Ghislain's attention. Glaring at Idun, he demanded to know how he knew that, considering they were from different kingdoms. Smiling evilly, Idun replied that of course, he knew. He revealed that he had worked long and hard to track Ghislain down because they had worked with the Delphini household to bring down Ghislain's family. Hearing that this bastard was part of the fall of his family caught the attention of the dying MC. His expression changed as he began questioning in his mind if there were other people involved in that incident besides Duke Define's household. Idun said that there was no point in explaining further since Ghislain would be dead soon. He told Ghislain to just accept his fate. This struck a nerve in Ghislain, and he shouted, calling Idun a bastard, telling him that he would never forgive him. Idun looked at him and said it was fine if Ghislain didn't forgive him, then proceeded to behead him. At the moment he was decapitated by the enemy, Ghislain held his neck, because even after that, he was still alive in that place, with his head on his shoulders. Ghislain started touching his face, wondering if all that had happened was a hallucination. He also noticed that he appeared to be in his younger self. He looked around the room, asking if he had been taken captive and used as a lab rat by the mages or something. He thought the mages were those arrogant bastards who had done that to him, and he planned to make them regret keeping him alive. Then, someone entered his resting place, calling him young master. It was one of the Perdium soldiers, Ricardo. Ricardo told his master to please come out since he knew his young master was already awake. Suddenly, a sword was pointed at Ricardo's neck, with Ghislain holding it. Ghislain told Ricardo that he would let him live if he answered all his questions, but he also planned not to let him leave alive. Ricardo, sweating, looked back at his master, doing something dangerous. He sighed deeply and said that what Ghislain had done was already crossing the line. Ghislain questioned why Ricardo didn't seem worried or scared. He wondered what was with Ricardo's reaction since he was being threatened. Ghislain asked Ricardo what he was talking about. Ricardo wiped his hand to push Ghislain away and said that Ghislain was just tired from his tantrum earlier and had fallen asleep. Ghislain began to question if that really happened. Ricardo, still holding his neck, asked his young master if he had forgotten everything after taking a nap. Ricardo told him that he had thrown a tantrum about how he was going to command the group to raid the orcs. Ghislain was confused, asking what Ricardo meant about the orcs and what he meant by saying he threw a tantrum. He told Ricardo that everything he was saying was nonsense. Ricardo pulled out his bag and told Ghislain that he needed to get his stuff together because people were waiting. Ghislain asked what this stuff was about and where they were going. Ricardo walked past him, saying there was no place they could go except the Perdium estate. Hearing this shocked Ghislain, and he asked himself what Ricardo meant. He grabbed the soldier and asked him to repeat where they were going. Ricardo, confused, asked for clarification. Ghislain asked if he meant the estate of Perdium, the fallen Perdium estate. Ghislain walked to the top of a cliff and looked at the territory of Perdium, which had once fallen in the life he had as a mercenary. Although he couldn't believe it at first, now that he had seen it firsthand, he was sure it was indeed the Perdium estate. He questioned why it was still standing because he had seen it reduced to ashes back then. Ricardo whispered to Ghislain, asking if he had had a terrible nightmare or something. He told Ghislain that calling his own household a fallen one would get him kicked out if the Count heard that. Ghislain pinched his cheeks, wondering if he was dreaming. But since he felt pain this time, he guessed it was reality. However, Ricardo thought of him as something weird. Ghislain thought to himself, a younger face, the estate in its original state. This could only mean one thing: he had traveled back to the past. Ghislain remembered that his younger self resented their household. His immaturity, born from feeling inferior, led to trouble, and as time passed, more people from the household began avoiding him. Unable to withstand the criticism, Ghislain ran away from home. Several years later, he became a mercenary. He survived countless battles, built up his skills, and made a name for himself. He returned to the Perdium County to make up for his past mistakes, but he could only fall to his knees as he saw his household had already been crushed to dust. For him, in that moment, he lost everything. But right now, it was all still here. All the people he held dear were still there. He laughed silently, thinking he couldn't believe this was reality. He wanted to sing with joy, but he quickly became serious, thinking it was still too early to rejoice. Ghislain looked at Ricardo and remembered that Ricardo told him they were there to raid the orcs. Ghislain also remembered this day vividly, as he could never forget it. This was the day most of the people in the raid squad would die. In Ghislain's past life, he had followed the orc raid squad in an attempt to make a name for himself. At that time, the report had said there were only 3 orcs. Ghislain thought it would be easy enough for someone like him, who had no experience commanding a squad. But when they arrived, there were more than 20 orcs. Almost all of them ended up dying because of his stubbornness and desire to command the squad. Ghislain prepared himself for the battle, but Ricardo was still doubting his young master. For Ghislain, it was still doable enough since the orcs didn't really have a strategy. The problem was whether the others would trust him, as they all thought he was some useless bastard. Suddenly, he heard something. It was the sound of the watchtower being destroyed. The watchtower began to fall, crashing to the ground, and the guards started panicking. One guard shouted that the orcs were here. They all began shouting that the orcs had arrived. Orcs that resembled warlords began charging at the unprepared guards. Ghislain questioned why they had arrived already. He wondered if the orcs had moved this quickly in his past life as well. The orcs began attacking, and the soldiers on the front line, unprepared, were beaten down by the monsters. Each attack from an orc was disastrous. One soldier shouted for everyone to get into formation. The raid squad commander, Scoven, ran as fast as he could when he heard the attack. He told everyone not to panic and to form a defensive formation. However, one downward slash from an orc sent many soldiers flying through the air, leaving them beaten. Even the squad commander was pushed back by the attack. Skoven could only curse in his mind because of the sudden attack. He thought they had let their guard down, as they were ambushed while unprepared. But what alarmed him most was that there were far more orcs than had been reported. He feared that at this rate, they were all going to die. Then someone shouted the commander's name, catching his attention as he was deep in thought. That person told him something was behind him. It was an orc, ready to deliver a full downward slash on the commander. Suddenly, there was an explosion on the ground. Someone had jumped with full force, causing the ground to explode. The commander was confused as a hand touched his shoulder, and he had no idea who it was. It was Ghislain, who had jumped and pushed the commander away, rushing toward the orc that was about to attack. The commander was confused about how that happened. It was their young master who was about to face the large orc's attack head-on without even any equipment. But the next thing that happened was the orc being cut into pieces. The right side of the orc was cut down with an upper slash from the MC. All of them were shocked, looking at the well-known useless master performing such a crazy stunt. In the end, the orc coughed up blood and ended up dead. The MC just stood there, watching the orc slowly die. Then the MC started rotating his sword, feeling annoyed at this point. He said that he guessed he still couldn't use mana at this time. He mentioned that he wished he had returned to the past earlier than this timeline. Ghislain called out to Skoven, who was still confused. Ghislain asked if he was the commander right now. Ghislain extended his hand and told Commander Skoven to give it to him. Skoven, confused, asked the young master's pardon. Ghislain clarified that what he wanted was the commander's rights. He told the commander to hand over the right to command. Skoven started to question in his mind what the young master meant and if he was really sure about asking for the right to command. Skoven knew that the young master was considered an idiot, but asking for command when the lives of soldiers were at stake was something else entirely. Commander Skoven refused, saying he couldn't give it to him. Ghislain, disappointed, asked, "What?" Skoven walked away, asking the young master if he thought this was some kind of game. Skoven said that even though he was the young master, he couldn't give up the authority that the Lord had given him so easily. Ghislain stayed silent, listening to the commander's rant. He was feeling annoyed, but Ghislain understood if an idiot had come up to him asking for command, he would have reacted the same way. Before they could discuss it further, another orc appeared, wild and ready to slaughter any human it encountered. Skoven moved in front of the MC and told him to fall back. He assured Ghislain that he would take care of everything and that Ghislain was still too inexperienced to lead the troops. Ghislain, now serious about fighting, said there was no other choice but to take action. Commander Skoven was pushed aside by the MC, who then threw his sword toward the approaching orc. The commander, shocked by this, grabbed Ghislain's collar and angrily shouted, asking what he thought he was doing. But as they argued during the heat of battle, Skoven suddenly remembered the orc beside them. To his shock, the orc had a sword stuck in its head, the sword thrown by the MC. The orc was dead with just that one throw, a perfect headshot from the MC. The commander was confused and couldn't believe what had just happened. He began to question how the young master had hit the orc's weak spot. Ghislain then asked Skoven if he knew what the most important thing in battle was. Commander Skoven, silent and bewildered, didn't respond. Meanwhile, the soldiers were losing morale, gripped by fear as the large number of orcs attacked. Ghislain told the commander that there was no hope of winning a battle if their troops were filled with fear. He emphasized that they needed to gain momentum in this fight. The MC became wild, as if possessed by the god of war. He rushed forward, pulling his sword from the head of the dead orc while charging. This gave him the momentum to jump high into the air. As he descended, he aimed a stab at an orc in the midst of the soldiers, who were busy defending while being pushed back. As Ghislain landed, he stabbed the orc in the head, killing it instantly. The soldiers, including Ricardo, were shocked. The captain was speechless at this turn of events. Ghislain then pulled his sword from the head of the dead orc. Then he shouted, telling the orcs to come at him because he would kill them all. Ghislain gained the attention of all the orcs, but he didn't back down and faced them head-on. Many orcs tried to attack him, but none of their strikes hit the MC. Instead, the MC was the one who managed to land blows on the critical parts of those monsters. One orc tried to slash at him, but instead of landing a hit, the orc's hand was the one that fell off from the strike of the MC's sword. As the bodies of the orcs continued to fall, the commander stood watching from the side, still in awe. He started to question if he was dreaming. Seeing Ghislain cut down the heads of those orcs made it even more unbelievable. He thought to himself, as a mana user, it was hard for him to do anything. He began to wonder how his skinny young master was doing all of this. But looking at his master, he could already tell he was exhausted. However, Commander Scoven noticed that Ghislain was using the smallest of movements to dodge attacks and was using his swordsmanship to strike at their weak spots. Commander Scoven could only think of one thing: Ghislain was like a manaless sword master. But he was still sweating at the thought, wondering if Ghislain was something even greater. Ghislain shouted, asking the orcs if that was all they had because he wasn't even warmed up yet. He started running after that taunt. Ghislain remarked that those orcs weren't living up to their reputation as a warrior species. Ricardo shouted, telling the soldiers that all the orcs were charging at the young master. One soldier asked if Ghislain was running away. Ricardo, worried about the young master, started calling the commander, maybe waiting for his command. But the commander stood like a statue, frozen in place, questioning in his mind what Ghislain was thinking. He started sweating even more because he didn't know what to do, and he didn't understand the actions of their young master. For Commander Scoven, running into the group of orcs and drawing their attention was good, but running away now was something he couldn't understand. What baffled him more was that the young master was running toward the edge of a cliff. Then, Scoven started to realize what the young master was planning, which made him sweat more because it was different from what he had expected. Commander Scoven looked at his soldiers. He called them and told his troops to raise a shield wall. Commander Scoven said they would follow the first sun. Meanwhile, Ghislain was still running away, with the orcs chasing him. Ghislain looked back and pointed his sword at the orcs. Ghislain thought that if Scoven, the commander, was skilled, he would have already realized what his plans were. Ghislain would have preferred to slice all the orcs down himself, but his useless stamina wouldn't be able to handle it. Still, he smiled because even then, this should be enough for him to manage. While the orcs were focused on fighting Ghislain and ganging up on him, a marching sound caught their attention as it sounds like soldiers are preparing for a counterattack. The soldiers were already raising their shields and pointing their spears, resembling Spartans performing a phalanx formation. Ghislain smiled, saying it was all perfect. Then, while the orcs' attention was on the soldiers, Ghislain jumped off the cliff like a suicidal man. For him, he would leave the troops and the decisions to Commander Scoven now. Scoven began leading the troops, just as Ghislain had expected. He ordered the soldiers to push the orcs toward the cliff, and they rushed at the orcs with all their strength. I don't know how they managed to push those large, muscular orcs, but they shouted as they pushed, perhaps to boost the soldiers' morale. In the end, they succeeded in pushing the orcs off the cliff. The orcs screamed as they fell, and when they hit the ground, they were all dead from the impact. The soldiers panted heavily after the battle, celebrating that they had done it. They had killed all the orcs. Meanwhile, Commander Scoven was shouting, calling out for their young master, who had fallen off the cliff. Ghislain, however, was holding onto the cliff walls, having thrust his sword into the rock to stop his fall. He was holding on for too long with just one hand. He smiled, looking at Scoven. Scoven was speechless, but as he realized the young master was okay, he slowly smiled. He offered his hand and told the young master to grab it, but Ghislain said he couldn't hold on any longer and released his hand from the handle of the sword. In the end, he fell. The soldiers, including Commander Scoven and Ricardo, began shouting, calling for the young master. Then someone called out to Ghislain, referring to him as an older brother or Appa. Ghislain was confused and said the girl's name. Her name was Elena. Fragments of bad memories began surfacing in Ghislain's mind as he stood there silently. He was silent and speechless, as those memories must be affecting his mental state. As he looked at the fragments, he realized they were memories of Elena, his younger sister. Then Elena grabbed his arm, startling Ghislain. Elena was crying, looking pitiful at that moment. She told her older brother that they needed to go together. Ghislain woke up from that bad dream, sweating. He seemed to be in an infirmary. He looked at his hand, thinking he was alive this time and that the soldiers had managed to save him. He slowly stood up, questioning whether it was a dream, but he was alarmed when he felt an intense pain in his body. He sighed deeply, feeling the pain, and said his whole body hurt. He thought it must be the consequence of pushing his body to the limit. Then, his maidservant came in, happy that her young master was awake. Ghislain was a bit confused and called her name. The maidservant name was Belinda. The maidservant Belinda, who was carrying a towel, sighed and said she had been so worried about the young master. She reminded him that she had once told him he should have let the soldiers handle the orcs. Suddenly, Ghislain ran to Belinda and hugged her, leaving her speechless. Belinda asked her young master what he was doing and if she had done something wrong. Ghislain said she had done nothing wrong and that he was just glad to see her. Belinda had been Ghislain's personal tutor. Since he was young, she was the only one who stayed by his side despite his idiotic antics. But after his family fell to ruin and she went missing, Ghislain had not been able to see her again. He never thought he would get to see her like this. Belinda, confused, asked why he was so happy when they saw each other every day. But this time, Ghislain hardened his resolve. Since Belinda was one of the people he trusted the most, he planned to tell her the truth. Ghislain grabbed Belinda's shoulder and told her to listen carefully. He told her that a catastrophe would soon strike Perdium. Confused, Belinda asked him what he was talking about. With a serious face, Ghislain told Belinda that he had died and come back to life. Belinda, slightly confused, agreed, saying she was sure the orcs had almost killed him. Ghislain clarified that wasn't what he meant, but Belinda continued fixing his bed. She told him that if he was aware, he was the one that is in great danger, not the Perdium territory. Belinda kept nagging Ghislain with a long stream of words, making him think that she didn't believe him. He guessed that what he said wouldn't work. Then Belinda asked Ghislain what he was going to do if he was too injured to go to the festival. This caught Ghislain's attention, and he asked Belinda what she meant by the festival. She reminded him, asking if he had already forgotten about it. She told him that Lady Elena had been waiting for the day to go to the festival with him. Belinda said it would be a great chance for the two of them to become close again, and then she started laughing. Ghislain could only agree as he grabbed the picture of him and Elena. He thought Belinda was right, there was always a festival around this time of year. In his past life, Ghislain hadn't had time to enjoy festivals because of his traumatic experiences. Ghislain asked Belinda how long it would be until the festival started. She calculated it and told him it would be held next week, so he had about a week left. Ghislain began thinking about what he would do for a week. Then, someone slowly came in. It was Elena. She called him Appa and asked if he was inside. Ghislain looked back in her direction with a serious expression. This was the day that changed Ghislain's life. The memory in which Elena asked him to go with her, the memory that continued to haunt him, because 1 week later, Elena was going to die. After seeing Elena, Ghislain hurriedly rushes and hugs his younger sister, which shocks Elena. Even Belinda is shocked by Ghislain's sudden actions. Elena seems embarrassed, blushing as she panics and asks her older brother what is wrong with him today. She asks Ghislain what kind of prank he's pulling this time. Ghislain just tells his younger sister that he misses her. Elena pushes Ghislain, telling him to let go of her, and the maidservant catches Ghislain. Elena tells her older brother that he's creeping her out. Ghislain, coughing from the push, can only think about how amazing Elena's strength is, especially coming from a child. He starts to wonder if she has always been that strong. Elena looks annoyed while wiping her shoulder. She says that Belinda asked her to be there. Elena asks Ghislain what game he's playing now. She asks if he thinks that this makes everything okay. Ghislain asks what she means by that. Elena tells her older brother that he once told her to piss off because she was annoying and said that just feeling her breath was disgusting. Elena glares at him, asking if he forgot everything after saying all that. Ghislain starts sweating, asking if he really said all that. He thinks that he wasn't close to Elena in his past life and was a complete piece of trash, so Ghislain can only apologize to his sister. Belinda is shocked, asking Elena if she heard it right that Ghislain apologized first. Elena is also shocked, telling her older brother that she heard an Urk attack them and asks if the Urk hit his head. Ghislain says it wasn't the Urk that got him. He was the one who slew all the Urks. He shouts, asking why they keep implying that he got hit, but before he can even finish his sentence, he feels intense pain in his body. In the end, Ghislain falls down onto his knees. Elena sarcastically tells him he's right, saying he must have defeated them in that state and came back unconscious. Belinda and Elena start laughing, teasing Ghislain at that moment. Ghislain is silent, listening and watching the two, who seem happy. He thinks that everyone is the same as he remembered them, and he starts questioning himself about why his past self wasted so much time on useless things. At the festival next week, Ghislain rejected Elena's offer to go together, making an excuse that the raid squad's events upset him, and at that moment, it was the last time he saw her alive. Elena's body was later found shredded to pieces along with her bodyguards. Ghislain shakes, thinking about it, clenching his chest, thinking he should have been with her. Then someone knocks on the door, asking if they can come in. It's actually Elena's bodyguards looking for her. The bodyguard on the left side is Jamal, and on the right side is Philip. Elena slowly walks toward them and asks if something happened because she told them to wait outside. Jamal apologizes for the sudden intrusion and tells Elena that the servants asked her to oversee their work on the festival supplies. Ghislain, confused, asks why the people would ask Elena to work on that. Belinda tells Ghislain that he wouldn't know because he always lazes around all day. Belinda wonders why there's a shortage of workers in Perdium, making it necessary for even the young lady to work. Elena bids farewell and says she's heading out, telling Ghislain to take care of himself. Ghislain starts to question if they're really that short on workers. He thinks that back then he didn't care about these things, so it's obvious he doesn't know now. So he calls his sister and says that he will help as well. After hearing that, Elena stops walking and looks back at her older brother in shock. Belinda and Elena turn pale after hearing that. Belinda asks if Ghislain really volunteered to help. On the other hand, Elena questions if he really got hit in the head. Ghislain was just silent, listening to these two looking down on him. All of the workers gathered in the place, arranging all the supplies for the festival. The people seemed to be in fear, seeing Ghislain in person at the supplies area. Ghislain shouted, saying that he would help this time. Elena told Ghislain to go away, saying that people would be too scared to work around him. Elena shoved her older brother's face. Ghislain asked Elena if that was how she treated someone who wanted to help. Elena said the only way he could help them was by staying out of their way and out of trouble. Ghislain was thinking that Elena's body was found near the slums, far from the festival grounds. He thought that someone must have called her out there or furtively moved her there. He was thinking that to prevent that, he needed to know the ins and outs of the castle first. Then a knight in armor rushed in, calling the young Lord Ghislain. Ghislain looked at the man and was shocked to see a familiar face. Ghislain started to question what the old man Fergus was doing there. Old man Fergus, panting, gave thanks that the young master was well, even after hearing the news. Old man Fergus started crying, holding the young lord's shoulders. He told Ghislain that he, a lowly servant, made his way to Ghislain as soon as he heard the news about the Urks. Ghislain told the old man they could stop talking about that now. Elena started smiling and told the old man that the timing was perfect. Elena said that Ghislain was acting weird right after waking up, so she asked the old man to please take Ghislain back to his room. Old man Fergus said he would follow the young lady's wish. Ghislain was annoyed, thinking that his damned hooligan image was getting in his way again. He could only do a facepalm because his image couldn't be helped. He planned to get to know what was going on around the castle better in the following week. Ghislain called Old Man Fergus and asked him if there was an abandoned training field in the castle. He asked the old man to bring him there. The old man was shocked to hear that and asked for clarification about the training field and why Ghislain was looking for it. Ghislain, with a serious face, said he would go there to train. Hearing that shocked Old Man Fergus, who told the young lord he would lead the way. Within a few minutes, they arrived at the training area, which caught Ghislain's attention. Ghislain started to question what this place was. He said it was in much better condition than he had expected. Ghislain started to look around the training grounds. He was thinking it was perfectly suitable for him to train at. He thought he had never seen anything like it in his life as a mercenary. Old Man Fergus said they kept it maintained in case young Lord Ghislain wished to use the facilities. Old Man Fergus hadn't lost faith in his young lord. He said he was certain that what young Lord Ghislain was going through was just a phase. Hearing that shocked Ghislain. He started to wonder if Old Man Fergus in his past life had also maintained the place for him. He could only look down in silence, thinking about what had happened in the past. Ghislain tapped the old man's shoulder. He told Old Man Fergus that he really needed to live a long life this time because dying felt like hell. Old Man Fergus didn't understand what he meant and asked for clarification. Old Man Fergus said Ghislain was acting as if he had already experienced life and death. Ghislain said that, as expected, the old man was quite sharp. He smiled and said that he actually did die and was resurrected. Old Man Fergus told his young lord that it was time to stop the foolery. Ghislain told Old Man Fergus that he could head back now since he was going to start his training. Old Man Fergus bowed and said he would be just outside. Ghislain looked back at the old man, thinking that in the past, he had always treated everyone around him as if they were his enemies. But realizing what happened now, he could only think that he was short-sighted. Ghislain thought that time was running out and all he had was just a week. Back then, it was revealed that the one behind Elena's death was a lord from a neighboring territory. Because of that, Perdium got caught up in a war, which led to its downfall. Ghislain thought that Elena's death was essentially the starting point of their house's downfall, which meant he needed to set things straight from there. The first thing he planned to do was to get a better physique. For him, it was frustrating that he didn't have much time. He started his breathing, realizing that even with the short time he had, he should at least be able to control mana. Mana is a supernatural resource that allows humans to break through their limits. Most people say that noticing and taking in mana is the hardest part, but Ghislain was able to do it even on the chaotic battlefield. He needed to connect the mana particles floating in the air and bundle them up as if he were a spinning spool. For someone like him, who had experienced tens of thousands of battles, creating a mana core was a piece of cake. But for Ghislain, if it were just that, he couldn't have been part of the strongest 7 in the land. Using the method from the half-burned book on magic that he picked up and the natural mana core of humans, he could create a second mana core and even a third. Creating a connected mesh of multiple cores would allow him to create an explosive force. But after forcing himself to do that, he started coughing blood, and his nose began bleeding too. Ghislain was panting. He said that 3 cores were his limit for now, even though he was able to reach 5 in his past life. This method allowed him to create an explosive force in a short time, but it also required an extremely large amount of mana in return. For Ghislain, this was the primary reason he lost to Idun in his past life, who brought an entire knight order to fight against him when he had run out of mana. Ghislain believed that he definitely would have won if it had been a fair fight. He thought that it was an inherently unstable technique, but this was enough for now, as he had a youthful body and plenty of time now. He promised that he would have Idun's head this time. To Ghislain, even those bastards standing behind the House of Delphini who helped destroy their country were targets. He planned to destroy them all, feeling angry as he thought about the past. 1 week later, the day of the festival arrived, and Ghislain began his preparations, including strapping his sword onto himself. He went to the place where he was supposed to meet his younger sister. Elena was shocked to see her older brother actually show up where they were supposed to meet. Elena said she was amazed to see her older brother actually come this time. She asked him what had happened to him, since he never came to these sorts of things. Ghislain said that as a Perdium, he should at least come to festivals every once in a while. Elena told Ghislain that he had been acting really odd recently. She said she had also heard that Ghislain had been doing nothing but training over the past week. Ghislain asked his younger sister what was so wrong about the next in line of the Knight family doing some training. Elena told him that he hadn't cared about these kinds of things before. She reminded him that he once said their dad was annoying and that he wished he was the Lord already. Hearing that hit Ghislain, Elena laughed and started walking slowly, saying she liked the way things were now. She was blushing, saying it seemed like the old Ghislain was back. Ghislain was silent, listening to the whims of his younger sister. He began to think deeply. He realized something over the past week, because his actions had changed, his reception and the future were also slowly beginning to change. On the other hand, Belinda warned Jamal and Philip, telling them to figure it out themselves if the young master created trouble. She said they couldn't afford to have any problems, especially with so many visitors. Philip and Jamal start sweating, telling Belinda that she doesn't need to worry and she can trust them. Going back to Ghislain, the general flow of things might be the same, but it is difficult to gauge the impact of his actions on small events. Making good use of the information from the future is his job right now. He thought that he needed to respond to each situation effectively. Ghislain touched the secret weapon hidden in his pocket, saying that his preparations were now complete. Ghislain follows his younger sister wherever she goes, keeping an eye on everything his sister is doing while Elena is having fun. Elena says that it is fun, but it's getting a little boring since it's the same every year. She begins to wonder if there is anything new this year. But Ghislain's attention is somewhere else. He starts to question in his mind because the festival is almost over, yet nothing has happened. He wonders if it is because he is with Elena. Then a guard comes in, asking Elena if she wants to check out the other areas as well. The bodyguard mentions that, according to his friend, there are new events elsewhere. The bodyguard asks Elena what she thinks about that. Elena asks if that's true. She goes with the guard, smiling and saying that this better be fun. But Ghislain starts glaring at the guards, thinking it must be the two of them. He says that the bodyguards Jamal and Philip are the traitors of their house. Those guys are smiling creepily while looking at Ghislain. Elena's escort knights, Jamal and Philip, were the most trusted knights in the feud because they had protected Elena since she was a child. It was known that they were murdered while protecting Elena in Ghislain's past life. But for now, the primary suspects for being the traitors in their house are these two bodyguards, and it's up to Ghislain to prove if his hunch is correct. Jamal cheerfully shows the place, saying that they're already here at the location he mentioned. But everyone falls silent because the place looks like an abandoned area with nothing in sight. Elena seems disappointed as she looks around. She asks what this is and why there's nothing there. Elena asks Jamal if he's sure there will be a performance in such a dirty place. Jamal starts scratching his neck, saying he guesses they aren't prepared yet. Jamal tells Elena that he thinks the people will arrive soon. Elena angrily tells Jamal to stop making jokes. She asks Jamal who would want to perform in a place like that. Ghislain stays silent, observing the area, but this is what he expected. For him, this may look like a simple deserted street at first, but the obstacles blocking the escape route suggest they prepared in advance. Then Elena suddenly grabs Ghislain, saying they need to leave now. Jamal tries to persuade her, calling her young lady, and asks if she thinks they should at least wait to see the show since they're already there. Elena says no thanks, saying she isn't going to watch a show in a place like this. Ghislain asks Elena if she works out or something because she's so strong. Elena seems annoyed after hearing that, but Philip suddenly bumps into Elena, pushing her aside. Philip calls her young lady and looks at her creepily, telling them to wait a little longer. Elena starts sweating as she sees his face, looking somewhat frightened. She, visibly scared, tells her escort knights that they're acting strangely and asks what the matter is today. But the two start surrounding the Perdium siblings. Jamal says he didn't mean to scare the young lady, Elena. He claps his hands and smiles creepily, saying it's because a reasonable request came in. Elena begins to question what this request is. Then, three mysterious men begin to appear. The one leading them is Frank. Frank says that, as expected, Jamal and Philip's work process is clean. Jamal proudly replies, of course, saying that they brought the young lady as promised and tells Frank that they need the deal right there. But Frank notices something. He notices Ghislain and asks if that is the eldest son of Perdium. Frank says that he didn't think he requested the eldest son to be brought there. Elena clings to Ghislain, shaking with fear, but Ghislain doesn't flinch at all. Jamal looks like a villain right now, and he says that he will hand Ghislain over for free. Jamal says that Ghislain foolishly followed them, not realizing that this would be his graveyard. Ghislain tells Jamal that he must have sold them out. Ghislain asks Jamal if he really thinks he can get away with just that. Jamal just smirks and tells Ghislain, "Why don't you just start worrying about yourself first?" Jamal says that all they need to do is run away to a faraway place. Jamal says they are getting sick and tired of this impoverished land, tormented by the barbarians. Jamal laughs, saying he's sure that plenty of others are leaving Perdium besides them anyway. But while this guy is acting arrogantly, Ghislain already steps forward without hesitation and releases a downward strike. The guy is confused, asking what happened, but he has already received the slash and is coughing blood. Philip is shocked to see that his friend was slashed, as are Elena and Frank, because they did not expect Ghislain to do that. As Jamal's body is cut, Ghislain tells him that even though others started moving, at least they never sold them out. Ghislain looks back at Philip, glaring at him, and asks Philip if he agrees with what he said. Philip starts panicking, making Elena his hostage. He says that Jamal was an idiot, asking how a knight could lose to an amateur like that. but a sword suddenly fly into Philip's head. It was a perfect headshot. Mana was actually embedded in it. As Philip slowly loses his life, he says that it was impossible for that to happen. With a single throw of the sword, Philip loses his life and falls to the ground. Ghislain watches him without a hint of mercy for the traitorous bastard, but his young sister sees everything. One of the assassins with Frank asks if they are sure it's the eldest son of the Perdium family. The other assassin says he thought Ghislain never had any real combat experience or fundamental training. Frank says that judging by Ghislain's appearance, he isn't mistaken at all. Frank thinks that, although they were taken off guard, Ghislain instantly killed two knights. And what alarms him is that Ghislain attacked using mana. Elena looks worried, hugging her older brother while shaking. She asks her older brother what is happening right now. Ghislain is silent the whole time, but suddenly, he smacks Elena's neck to make her lose consciousness. Then he lays Elena down on the ground, telling her to take a little rest. Ghislain looks back at the enemy with killing intent. Frank thanks Ghislain, saying he is grateful for doing the work for them as the eldest son of Perdium. Frank says that Ghislain is much different from what he had heard. He says they were planning to take care of those to themselves. Then Frank puts the tobacco pipe in his mouth and asks Ghislain if he has been hiding his true skills the whole time. Ghislain pulls out his sword and asks Frank why it matters to him if he was hiding his skills. Ghislain looks at the enemy, thinking that what he needs to defeat are 3 people right now. For Ghislain, the 2 beside Frank are nothing, but the one in the middle, who is Frank, exudes a different level of mana. Ghislain emits some mana, and thread-like strands start forming in his hands. He plans to end this quickly. Ghislain tells Frank that he'll ask him one thing, and then he asks about the one who requested this. Frank asks Ghislain if there is any need for a dead man to know about that. Then Ghislain starts to get serious this time. He says that he knows Frank wouldn't say it easily, no matter what. Ghislain threatens him, saying he'll want to spill those words soon enough anyway. One of the assassins behind Frank asks if they should sever his head. Frank says they don't need to do that. Frank orders him to capture Ghislain alive and break every limb in his body so that he can't help but go mad. Frank smiles, saying Ghislain should writhe in pain for the shape to come out beautifully. 2 of Frank's underlings start to move as they follow their leader's command. Ghislain is also ready to release that one attack. He pulls out the thing he said he needed for preparation and throws it in front of the 2 assassins. The assassin rushing in starts to sweat, asking if that was a firecracker. But that firecracker snaps as someone slices through it. It's Ghislain, who thrusts his sword into the enemy's head, killing him instantly. But the other assassin doesn't flinch, even after seeing his ally die. He tells Ghislain that it was just a shallow trick. As the assassin slashes at Ghislain's side, Ghislain blocks it easily. Then he glares at the enemy with the fastest intensity, watching their movements as if he can read them through and through. Then he uses his arm to capture the sword, locking it in his grasp, which shocks the enemy. After twisting his arm, he manages to take away the enemy's sword, and then Ghislain slices that enemy down without hesitation. While Ghislain is distracted, something catches his attention. It's Frank, playing dirty and slashing at Ghislain's back. But even in that split second, Ghislain manages to move his arm and block the attack, which alarms Frank. Frank starts sweating, questioning how Ghislain managed to block his attack in that position, since it was a perfect sneak attack. Ghislain moves his body to gain momentum and is about to release an upward strike. In that moment, the attack seems to hit the villain. It was a perfect hit aimed at the neck, a flawless upward strike from the MC that even sliced through the tobacco pipe. But it only results in a minor cut as Frank evades it. The tobacco pipe and some of Frank's hair are cut off by Ghislain in the process. Frank manages to counter with a downward strike, but Ghislain blocks it using 2 swords. Frank embeds some mana into the wound on his neck. He actually uses mana to create some sort of mana shield, protecting his neck from Ghislain's attack. He says he was so surprised, telling Ghislain that if he had been lacking in mana, he would have been beheaded just now. On the other hand, Ghislain, who is blocking the attack, is confused. He starts to question how Frank survived a strike to his neck and wonders if Frank focused his mana around his neck to reduce the damage. Frank puts tremendous force into his sword, pressing Ghislain down, and infuses it with an even stronger surge of mana. Frank smiles, ready to get serious this time. He tells Ghislain that he has no clue how Ghislain learned swordsmanship at his age, but he says that Ghislain shall die here. Frank told Ghislain that he had learned a strange swordsmanship but still couldn't beat him with such feeble mana. Then Frank started pushing his attack down with a greater amount of mana embedded in it. He laughed evilly, telling Ghislain that he would die there. But Ghislain wasn't even threatened by his empty words and just smiled at Frank. This caught Frank's attention, prompting him to ask why Ghislain was smiling in that situation. To avoid the pressure of being pushed down by Frank, Ghislain moved his body to get an opening. This alarmed Frank as he slowly lost balance, and Ghislain kicked Frank in the head. It was a perfect hit this time, and Frank was the one being pushed back by the young MC. But Frank still smiled, saying that he had already told Ghislain that all of his attacks wouldn't work with that amount of mana. Suddenly, blood came from Frank's mouth, catching his attention. He started to fall to his knees and began coughing up blood. Frank looked at his hand, which was shaking. He started to question what had just happened. He thought the power of Ghislain's attack seemed different. Frank couldn't believe it, thinking that there was no way for Ghislain to pierce through his enhancement with that skill level. Ghislain slowly walked toward Frank and said that he never expected there would be a true culprit behind Elena's death. Ghislain starts to get serious, and the atmosphere shifts along with his aura. It feels as if he has become a completely different person. Ghislain's mana began rampaging this time as he unleashed his third core. Ghislain accused Frank of killing Elena and warned him to prepare himself. Frank started sweating in fear, questioning what was happening. He asked Ghislain how he boosted his mana so greatly, but Ghislain didn't answer. He was ready to slash down his enemy. Frank was shocked, thinking that Ghislain was so fast. This time, Ghislain was the one continuously attacking, controlling the tempo of the battle. All Frank could do was block Ghislain's attacks. Ghislain rotated his sword and released a full swing using the two swords in his hands. But even with that great force, Frank managed to block the attack. Frank couldn't believe that someone like Ghislain could do that. He thought it was impossible. He felt his hands turning numb just from blocking Ghislain's strikes. His hands shook as his sword was chipped down. To Frank, no matter how much mana one draws, it usually has limited effect. As he fought Ghislain, he couldn't imagine the worst-case scenario, having never heard of a method that increased mana so explosively. For him, the sudden change in Ghislain was as if he had become a completely different person. With Ghislain's final strike, he managed to break Frank's sword, landing a full upward strike on the villain. It was a long slash that penetrated the enemy's body, but Ghislain didn't want to end it there. He released another follow-through strike, piercing it through Frank's body. That strike made Frank cough up blood. The MC was merciless, using his arm to push Frank against the wall, immobilizing him. As he grabbed Frank, Ghislain reminded him they needed to finish their previous conversation. While slowly pushing the sword, Ghislain asked Frank who had requested the attack on his younger sister, but Frank had a hidden dagger in his hand. While groaning in pain, he thought he wouldn't go down so easily. Frank planned to target Elena, who was unconscious, hoping to take the young lady of Perdium with him before he died. He swung his hand to throw the dagger at her, but he began to question what happened when strings made of mana suddenly appeared, restraining his hands. No matter what he tried, he couldn't move his hands. Ghislain then offered to make a deal with him, glaring at him. Ghislain warned Frank not to try anything useless and just answer his question, promising to sheath his sword. Frank started looking at the threads, wondering if they were created with mana. He was thinking that no matter what he did, he couldn't move his hand. He started to question when Ghislain made those threads. Frank recalled a glimpse of memories when Ghislain made the threads. But the MC was always prepared, as this threat had always lingered within him. Ghislain, ever merciless, presses the sword deeper into Frank, making the pain excruciating for his enemy. Then Ghislain looked him in the eyes while holding the sword that stabbed him. Ghislain said that he was sure someone of Frank's caliber would know how to patch himself up. But Ghislain told him it wouldn't matter if he destroyed his mana core. Frank was confused, asking him what he meant. But as Frank looked at the sword, the mana was already surging through it in Ghislain's hand. Frank began shouting as he noticed something different in his body. Ghislain's mana was starting to affect him. His mana core began to break down, and he felt his mana scattering. Frank shouted at Ghislain, asking if he was out of his mind. Frank warned that one wrong move and the backflow of mana could cause an explosion and blow the whole area away. He asked if Ghislain was planning to self-destruct, but Ghislain's face remained unfazed. Ghislain said that would only happen to someone unskilled, assuring him he could manage it. Seeing Ghislain's serious expression, Frank started sweating, realizing Ghislain wasn't bluffing. Looking into Ghislain's eyes, Frank realized one thing, that he was going to die. He saw the Grim Reaper himself in Ghislain's eyes, who was dead set on destroying him. In the end, Frank started to spill everything, shouting that it was Count Desmond who ordered him. Frank shouted more, saying that the Count was the one who requested it. He said that Count Desmond told him he needed a pretext to start a war against the Perdium and Degard families. Ghislain questioned if it was true and thought it must be Count Desmond this time. In Ghislain's previous life, such underground work was left to families allied with the ducal house. Ghislain grew angry, questioning how Duke Delphini dared orchestrate such nonsense behind the scenes. Ghislain asked Frank if that was why he wanted to kill Elena. Frank told Ghislain he was right. With that, Ghislain had already heard what he needed and stabbed Frank deeper. Frank, coughing up blood, asked Ghislain what he was doing, saying this was different from what he had promised earlier. Ghislain asked him what was wrong with what he was doing, telling Frank that he must have killed plenty in his time, yet he was now scared to death when it was his turn. Then Frank started laughing and bumped his forehead against Ghislain's. Frank told Ghislain that nothing would change even if he killed him, claiming he'd already finished the work with the Degard. He asked Ghislain if he thought people would listen to a punk like him, adding that Perdium would perish due to the war. But Ghislain didn't want to hear his nonsense anymore and pushed his face away. Ghislain grabbed his face and told Frank there was something he wanted to say. Ghislain told Frank that he was reborn after dying, so things would be different this time. Frank shouted as Ghislain slowly broke his mana core. In that moment, fireworks started to rise, exploding into a beautiful display for the people celebrating the festival. But beneath the festival lights lay the exploded remains of Frank, with Ghislain just standing there. He stood silently, looking at the remains of the traitorous guards and the dead assassin who had tried to kill his sister. Ghislain was panting, exhausted, as if he were someone who had only recently trained yet faced formidable enemies, escort knights and a skilled assassin sent to kill his sister. But when he looked at Elena, he was rendered speechless. His younger sister was sleeping so soundly that saliva was even beginning to drip from her mouth. This man, tired of war and craving peace, tossed his bloodied sword away. He looked up and inhaled deeply. It was the end of a disaster he had managed to prevent, but there was still one final task left to complete. But suddenly, he felt something different within his body and began coughing up blood after the battle. He drops to his knees, the backlash from the battle taking a toll on his not yet fully trained body. Wiping the blood from his mouth, he begins to think deeply. He cursed, saying that exploding 3 cores wasn't an issue back when he was the Mercenary King. He promised himself that he wouldn't fall like that. Then he looked at an abandoned warehouse, sensing that something from his past life was hidden there, something that could trigger a war. Then he kicked open the door to a random warehouse. And there, lying on the ground, was a dead body. Ghislain was thinking that in his previous life, they found another body besides Elena's at this place. Ghislain thought that he must be related to Degard, because according to what Frank said earlier, the dead body was actually the son of Degard. Ghislain started covering the dead body. He thought that it seemed he was killed along with his escort knight, and he began to question if this was how they silenced them and framed them as Elena's killers. Ghislain knew that the moment this was revealed, the war would start. He pulled out a firecracker from his pocket, planning to erase all evidence. He burned the whole warehouse and carried Elena on his back. He was determined not to let things happen as those people intended. But while Ghislain was walking away from that area, a scout was watching him, and in just a few moments, that person suddenly blinked away. The man in the robe who had been watching Ghislain returned and started reporting to some high-ranking nobles. He said that what happened was a complete failure. The nobles reported that they had sent a guard knight as well as Frank, their best asset. One noble shouted, scolding the scout, asking how they couldn't even take care of one girl. Another noble asked if they had let their guard down because they thought it would be easy work. The scout started sweating because of those words from the noble. He explained that it all happened because of interference from Ghislain Perdium. The nobles began muttering, questioning if he meant Ghislain, the useless bastard of the north. Another noble said he was sure everyone knew Ghislain was a useless piece of trash. One noble asked if the scout was really using Ghislain as an excuse. The scout said that Ghislain was completely different from the information and rumors about him. The scout told them everything he had seen. He described how Ghislain glared at the enemy with cold killing intent, pulling out his sword and manifesting it with his mana. He recounted how Ghislain used his mana to eliminate the assassins instantly and without hesitation, as if they were mere pieces of sushi. He detailed how Ghislain captured and killed Frank using unconventional fighting techniques, threatening him until he revealed everything through underhanded methods. He also mentioned how Ghislain burned down the warehouse, destroying all evidence, before walking away with Elena. The scout could only conclude one thing: Ghislain was a completely different person. The scout said they had already taken care of things with Degard, so starting a territorial war wouldn't be an issue. He begged the nobles to give him one more chance. But the nobles were furious with the result and told him to shut up, scolding him for failing to gather information on one kid. One noble asked if he realized how much of a setback this event had caused them, saying he couldn't even complete an easy mission and still had the audacity to ask for one more chance. They agreed on one thing, that he should be eliminated. Then, someone seated at the center spoke a single word. He told the nobles that they were noisy, and everyone fell silent instantly. The person with a shady aura asked the scout what kind of chance he wanted. The scout said he would get rid of Ghislain Perdium. The leader asked him how he planned to do that. The scout replied that he would arrange a natural duel and already had someone in mind. The nobles began questioning who that person was. The scout revealed that the person's name was Cain Loges, famous for his strength-based swordsmanship. He said that despite his young age, Cain was the epitome of strength, and he could confidently say that no one in the north could match his power. The scout added that Cain was Ghislain's cousin, so he was sure it wouldn't be forced to have them meet. The nobles were silent about the scout's proposal, as the leader was the one speaking. With a serious look in his eyes, he told the scout that if he failed again, there would be no next time. The scout assured their leader that he wouldn't disappoint him. In the Perdium Castle training hall, Old Man Fergus asks his master for an excuse because something is approaching. But suddenly, some sort of string appears and grabs the sword that was on the wall of the training hall. This shocks Old Man Fergus. The sword is pulled in a certain direction, landing in Ghislain's hand as he catches it. The guy was like Spider-Man. Then he starts rotating his sword left and right and says it's alright now, that skill should do for now. This time, since he was focused, he only just noticed the old man standing nearby. He called out to Old Man Fergus. The old knight bows and apologizes. Fergus said that Ghislain was so focused on his training. Then, curious, Fergus asks the young master how he did that just now. Ghislain starts demonstrating the mana string attack on the sword and asks if that's what Fergus was referring to. Ghislain explains that it's called a mana thread, using mana like a string. Ghislain recalls that in his past life, he used it all the time, but he knows that at his current skill level, he needs to implode his core to use it as he used to because he's lacking mana. He looks at his hand, thinking that if he only made one thread to use less mana, he could still use it despite having limited mana. Old Man Fergus, who is confused, says that he thought he had trained his mana for a long time but had never seen something like that. Fergus starts thinking deeply. He realizes that just a while ago, the young master didn't even use mana, let alone train. He begins questioning in his mind how long it took Ghislain to come up with the idea of using mana like that. Ghislain asks the old man if he has something to tell him. Fergus says he just wanted to stop by to say something. Ghislain asks him what it is. Then Fergus bows and thanks him for protecting the young lady. Ghislain asks him why he should be thanking him because it was something he should have done. Then Ghislain invites the old man to eat. In the territory of Perdium, a few days pass after that incident. The festival was paused. It only made sense, as a guard knight tried to traffic the young lady. Elena was alone, saying that everyone thinks she is lying when she says that Ghislain was the only one who saved her. Elena tells Ghislain that he should have said something to them. Ghislain says it's fine since people wouldn't believe them anyway. Belinda is quite annoyed about this. She says that Jamal and Philip were trying to take the lady for themselves. She starts calling them bastards, saying that she knows they are perverts. But Ghislain just smiles silently because Elena lived. For Ghislain, he was able to stop the war from happening, but he is sure those guys won't give up. He knows that he can't stop them on his own forever. He needs to grow a military force. Ghislain thinks that he needs to get more into politics to achieve something like that. But when he opens the food that was served, he sees nothing elegant, just a simple piece of potato. He is silent at first. Then he asks Belinda why they are getting dessert first. Belinda asks him what he means by dessert. She says he must already know about their situation. Then Ghislain hears someone shouting outside their estate, demanding compensation. His eardrums felt as if they were about to burst from the intense rallying sounds coming from outside. It seems to be a fat merchant shouting, telling the Perdium family to compensate for the damages caused by the festival's cancellation. Behind him is a crowd of merchants rallying, shouting at them to compensate. Even when the guards tell them to calm down, the people are furious. They shout, saying that the Perdians must come out now and that the people inside must be swimming in money. Ghislain looks outside the window and asks what the hell is going on. Belinda says she knew those guys would do this. She explains to Ghislain that their county is full of merchants who make a living from the profits generated by the festival. She says last year was good enough for them. Belinda tells Ghislain that since the festival was cancelled after just one day, it makes sense they are all upset. Ghislain starts sweating after hearing that. He asks Belinda if the situation in their county is that bad. Thinking about it, for Ghislain, this situation is not good. He thinks that they will only get more aggressive if he doesn't do anything about them. Ghislain calls Old Man Fergus and asks him about the tasks that the soldiers are doing. Ghislain tells Old Man Fergus to send them down to calm the crowd. The old man just smiles and tells Ghislain that they don't have any soldiers. Ghislain is quite shocked, asking what he means. Old Man Fergus explains that most of them have been dispatched to the Forest of Monsters for reconstruction due to the Urk raid. Ghislain can only swear in his mind, realizing that they don't have any soldiers left. Perdium is basically at war eternally, with barbarians to the north and on the other side, the Forest of Monsters from which threats can emerge at any moment. Realizing that there is no money or soldiers left, Ghislain can only think that their territory is a mess. Then Ghislain grabs Belinda and tells her that they need to talk. He asks if she is the one managing his money right now. Ghislain tells Belinda to use it to calm down those merchants. But with a straight face, Belinda says there isn't any money. Ghislain asks her why there is no money. Belinda reminds him that the Count cut off his allowance because he spent money like water. He then starts to question if he doesn't have money at all. At that moment, Ghislain realizes one thing: he is broke right now. Ghislain asks Belinda to lend him some money, but she says she doesn't have any. Ghislain can only look out the window and start swearing. He begins to question what they have right now since they don't have any money or soldiers. For Ghislain, without even a small amount of money, there is nothing he can do, even if he has knowledge of the future. Right now, his plan is that he needs funds first. While someone is running down the hallway, Ghislain is still thinking if there is another way. He starts to question if there is something on the estate that they could sell, but he stops thinking about that when Ricardo appears, shouting and calling him. Ghislain looks at Ricardo, who is panting heavily. He asks Ricardo what it is and why he is in such a hurry. Ricardo tells Ghislain that there is a problem and that the young Master Cain wants to see him. Ghislain, confused, starts asking what he means by Cain. Meanwhile, the commander of the army, Scoven, is totally beaten up today. Then someone punches him again in the face. A large fist was approaching Scoven at a faster speed with greater force. It landed a perfect uppercut on Scoven's abdomen. Scoven started coughing up blood. That punch was so disastrous and painful. Even though he was wearing full armor, the blow left a mark on it, bending the iron armor on his body with its incredible strength. When Ghislain arrives, Scoven is already down. Scoven, who is totally beaten up and panting, starts calling his young master. Seeing the poor state of one of the estate's soldiers makes Ghislain's face look angry. Ghislain starts glaring at the bastard who brought his loyal knight to such a state, transforming an innocent man into someone so wretched. Then a big, large, and muscular guy appears. He tells Ghislain that he has been waiting and starts calling Ghislain's name while smiling at him. I don't know what will happen next, but this young chick smells some kind of beating in the next chapters.